We're broadcasting from Ukraine with an honored guest. We are in the studio of Hromadske TV, which means public in Ukrainian, a Ukrainian independent network. And it's a special edition of Hromadske in conjunction with the Atlantic Council. And we will examine what comes after the Ukrainian elections of Petro Poroshenko. What steps does Ukraine need to take to fulfill its dream of being democratic? And I'm joined tonight by my co-moderate, David Patrikarakos, an author and journalist who will moderate the discussion with our three guests. I think you would introduce them.
Well, thank you very much, Natalia. So we're very honored to have Pavlo Shelemata, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Ukraine's Minister for Trade and Economic Development, obviously a critical post at this time in the country's history. And Adrian, and it's ironic given my surname that you're going to have to help me. What is the correct pronunciation?
Karatnitsky.
Karatnitsky from the Atlantic Council, who has long been an expert on this region. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
So what we're looking at is, loosely speaking, what is the best way to take Ukraine forward? A new president has just been elected. Things are looking perhaps a little more positive, but great challenges still remain. So we'd like to address some of those tonight with your expertise. So I'll sort of kick things off.
And I would like also to encourage our audience to explain how it's working. We are broadcasting in English. The audience can also watch it in Ukrainian on hromadske.tv. And at the same time, we encourage everybody to tweet and to ask the questions to our guests. And we would follow all the questions in English, in Ukrainian, get it to you and get the answers. So it's an opportunity for for our audience to come and to ask the questions both to the Ukrainian minister, to the senior fellow from Atlantic Council, and we'd also would like to join that in some time Hanna Hopko, the civil society leader, the coordinator of the Emergency Reform Package Initiative, will come, and that she would be a lot also to talk about the reforms.
Thanks a lot, Natalia. So I'd like to start by opening a question to the Minister. So we are 6 months on from Maidan, from the start of the Maidan revolution. The Ukrainian people went to the polls, they elected a new president, they elected him decisively with a single round. But Independence Square is still full of tents. Is it time for these people to go?
Well, I always said that it's good to have Maidan, at least mentally and maybe organizationally, in Ukrainian politics. And I think Maidan is already in the Ukrainian DNA. It was twice successful, and I think it will be successful, if needed, future times as well. But what is important, even in our case in the government, is that this constant pressure, constant scrutiny, which was basically unheard of. Because as we know, in 2005, Maidan dissolved itself. And that was probably a bit of a mistake. Now, I don't mean to stay physically on the square, but keep the government under scrutiny, keep the government accountable, keep the government responsible. That's what the society needs through different forms of Maidan.
And how would you do that? How would you keep them constantly accountable?
Well, now it's easy to do, by the way. In the 21st century, the distance is becoming much closer and the light is becoming much stronger. What I mean is the social media. I mean excellent, aggressive in a good sense of the word, journalists asking questions, scrutinizing your actions. Putting this all together, that constitutes the important parts of the civil society that Ukraine is developing right now.
So really there's no need for them still to remain?
That's basically their choice, by the way, but in one form or the other, like for example, we have the Sunday rallies there as well, so that could be another idea. So some regular reports from the government officials, from the city officials as well, I think this would be quite a good form of direct democracy.
Great. So what do you think, Adrian, from perhaps a more international view? Because people abroad, they look at pictures from Ukraine, and Maidan really has become kind of a shorthand for what is happening in the country. Do you think it's time for them to go? Are they holding the country back psychologically, or do they serve as a reminder of the revolution?
Well, I was mindful of the fact that the new president of Ukraine gave 2 speeches on Inauguration Day, and one word didn't appear in either of them, Maidan. He spoke of the 100 who died in the defense of democracy. He spoke about public controls and being held to account. He spoke about the desire for a new way of living. And I think that partly one of the reasons that he did not mention Maidan was precisely because the character of the Maidan seems to have shifted, the sociology of the Maidan. I don't know if anyone has done detailed examinations of who is there versus who was there, but it seems like it is not the same sociology of the initial Maidan. Many of the people who are in the defense forces have gone and now are risking their lives on the front lines. Other people have receded back and are active in social and civic life. In the intellectual Maidan, which also exists, there's the civic Maidan. There are political forces that have and been mobilized by this. So there are a variety of dimensions in this. It's up to Ukrainians. I don't have to traverse the traffic of Kyiv to deal with this. But it seems to me that maybe some compromise could be found, that there should be some residual public space that is devoted to people who, if they want to stay for the foreseeable future, that they should be allowed to stay. But it should be, in my view, as an outsider, diminished to some extent. At the same time, some kind of a long-term memorial has to be planned on part of the territory that, I find it a kind of an interesting postmodern phenomenon, this event. It is part memorial, it is part a real thing, it is part memorialization, and it's unique in the world. It's this permanent thing which has echoes of the past and sounds of the present. So I'm not sure, I wouldn't be for losing this wonderful mix of postmodern reality. On the other hand, I think that some shrinking of the Maidan is probably called for, precisely because the Maidan has spread back into civil society, into civic activism, and into intellectual life.
That sounds reasonable. So, coming to more recent events, obviously you just had a new president elected. What does Petro Poroshenko's election mean for Ukraine, do you think, Pavlo?
Well, first of all, what it means for the image of Ukraine inside Ukraine and outside of Ukraine, I think it was probably the best answer to those people who started to doubt whether Ukraine is or isn't a failed state. Now, somehow it's quite interesting that, if you cherish this imperial dreams, you bully your neighbors around, you don't have decent democratic elections, you believe to be a strong state, Now, our answer to those people is free and democratic elections in Ukraine. So that's number one. And all those doubts, whether it is a state, not a state, failed state, I think that this is the best answer to that. That's number one. Number two, the existence of the presidents psychologically and organizationally cements the government structure, organizational structure, so that has a strong organizational and psychological effect, and especially the figure like the new elected president with his leadership abilities. I think that this would be a strong addition. We need the person who can talk to the presidents around, who can speak on behalf of the people. And therefore, the fact that it was decided in the first round with such a strong support, I think is a good thing for Ukraine.
I thought it was very interesting, actually, to see how badly the right-wing parties did, given there was a lot of accusations coming, especially from Russian media, that Kiev was government of fascists, of Nazis. But actually, what the Ukrainians showed was that they were very centrist, voted over, and the fringe parties really didn't do very well at all, did they? So I think for Ukraine's international image, that was fantastic.
Well, and by the way, we never believed in this fascist propaganda. So I'm not surprised. You know, I knew that this would be more or less like this.
Sure, not a surprise, but it was good that it was shown publicly.
Yes, it was. Yeah, and actually, it was also a good comparison. I think we heard it in Wroclaw, right? That the fact that right-wing, I wouldn't call them fascists, by the way, the right-wing parties in Ukraine got together some 2%, and right-wing, extreme right-wing parties in Western Europe got a much bigger percentage.
And by the way, those are the kinds of parties that are the bedrock of European support for Mr. Putin. So that's
exactly.
And I would jump in because we do have a lot of questions, our audience. I mean, I think we won't answer them all together. I mean, we would, for instance, there would be one tweet, and I really encourage using this hashtag #MaidanLiveOn to Pavlo Sheremetyev. What kind of economic assistance to Ukraine should the EU prioritize? Short, medium, on the long term. But it's not everything. There would be something as, how do you see the future of Ukraine after joining EU in any format? But the most interesting is by Stefan Lahi. Which real-world measures could be applied to bring Ukraine out of corruption and organized crime into the EU compliance? I guess the one, I mean, they're all together.
Right.
But
Let me. I'll start with this and try to address, in a way, maybe all of them. Well, first of all, I think that the assistance coming to Ukraine is quite overwhelming, I should say. Well, in the short term, of course, balancing the macroeconomics. I mean, we know that the public finance was in a terrible state when the government has arrived at the end of February. So the financial support, which was given by the international financial organizations, by the United States, by the European Union, is very much appreciated. But this is only the short-term support. Because, of course, in the midterm and the long term, we should launch the engines of the Ukrainian internal growth. And these two engines, from what we see, is the small and medium business, which was neglected, raided, abused for quite a long time. It's somewhere between 10 and 20% of the Ukrainian economy. It should be 50%. So it's a great potential there. And number two, and by the way, it's connected, is the export promotion. So I would say in the midterm, if Europe keeps its markets open as it did unilaterally at the moment back in May, and at the moment temporarily until we sign the second part of the economic part of the association agreement, that would be great too. And of course, in the long term, we would welcome any investments, European investments, well, any internal and foreign investment, because that is also the growth, the engine of the Ukrainian economy.
So that would be still to the question about how to the real-world measures be applied to bring Ukraine out of corruption and organized crime.
And
it's both of you, of course.
I can take the lead on this, perhaps. I mean, look, it depends on, what is the real world? The real world is the world of Mr. Berlusconi, as well as the world of, super states that have very rigorous controls, such as Poland, where a minister who does not declare a wristwatch beyond a $3,000 limit is forced to resign. So I think if Ukraine ends up somewhere within that European universe, it will be in the world standards. I don't think we can expect the ideal, but I do think we can expect that we will not have a repetition of this massive theft of billions of dollars per year by the head of the country. We will not have public contracts bid in a way that is non-competitive. I think we can expect that Ukraine will take a look at some of the things that were done under the Yanukovych regime to see which were done in acceptance with international procedures, and that maybe some people have to go to jail for some of these things. And I think that would be a start. I don't think, if Ukraine is within the ambit or the amplitude of general European practice, it may mean that it is in the Italian amplitude of general practice, or it may mean that it is in the British amplitude. But I think either will be light years ahead of where Ukraine has been in the past 5 to 20 years.
Let me briefly follow up on what Adrian has said. Because some of the things are already done, and there's a new law on public procurement which was adopted already 2 months ago.
With the strong pressure of the civil society, we will have Hanna talking later.
and with a very active participation of the Ministry of Economy too. And Hanna will be here because, yes, there was a part of the public pressure, but it was also supported by the European Union office, by the World Bank office, and Transparency International office. So altogether, it was quite a good example of how the civil society can work together with the government and international community to push the country into the right direction.
I do think one issue to be worried about is the composition of the parliament. We know that this parliament has been a get-along parliament with corruption for its entire tenure. There was never a culture that this parliament, much of the parliament has been implicated in corruption. So I think that the president's call for new parliamentary elections has to be an important component of this. And I think if we remember what happened under President Yushchenko, who did not move very quickly to parliamentary elections and thought that simply the pressure of the Orange Maidan was going to lead the parliament to behave properly, that is a potential danger. If you really want to move forward with reforms, you really should use the impulse of civic-mindedness, the changes in public opinion, the better awareness of the public, and go to the country and let the country select a new leadership in the parliament as well to help control the functions of anti-corruption.
And we encourage our audience, because that's an opportunity for them created by us, to using the hashtag #MaidanLivesOn to ask the question, but you would see now what actions you propose to combat monopolies in the Ukrainian economy. And we would add to that during the Wroclaw Global Forum, AtlanticCouncil Wroclaw Global Forum, you said the prominence of oligarchs in the Ukrainian economy should be decreased. How to achieve that?
Well, through two ways, of course. I mean, we have here the numerator and denominator, if I may put it this way. In numerator, we really have to limit the authority, any kind of access that oligarchs might have to the public finance. And by the way, the new law on public procurement does exactly this. But in the denominator, we should have a strong development, as I mentioned, of small and medium business, and to strengthen and enforce competition. That's why, for example, the strengthening of Ukrainian anti-monopoly agency should be of paramount importance.
So we're talking about a series of reforms here, some of them economic, but it seems to be, and especially from spending many months in this country, that what we're looking at actually is sort of pervasive institutional corruption. Now, I think part of the reforms are economic, but part of them have to be criminal, surely. But how do you go about, Adrian, dealing with a system that has had pervasive corruption embedded within it for over 2 decades? Where do you start? How do you do it?
Well, I think it is an impossible and difficult question. I think that the Maidan, since it was a rejection of the mindlessly excessive, over-the-top corruption of the Yanukovych years, maybe allows a kind of a signal that the public, you could go 5 years, you could go 10 years, you could go 20 years back. But it seems to me that it would be appropriate to look at what was the record, especially in public procurements and special arrangements over the course of the Yanukovych years, and maybe focus on that and draw a limit there. It could reach and extend far more, but I think that if you open up the Pandora's box of looking at the past, you create a sort of a circumstance where corporations and new investors and foreign direct investors don't really know whether an asset that they want to buy or an asset that they want to invest in is something that is potentially open to scrutiny and which is open to challenge. One thing that I find particularly interesting and no one is really discussing is that Ukraine does not have the ability of Ukrainian and international investors and citizens to take part in the stock market. That the oligarchs themselves have, a few of them have gone to the capital markets in Europe, et cetera, but very, very few of them have, and many of them are just private holdings. And there should be some kind of, in my view, tax pressure that would provide favored treatment for those businesses that open up to the public sale of some of their shares, to allow, and also I think that as the economic situation becomes difficult, to allow in compensation for lack of progress on wages for some of the workforces to be given some potential shareholding, modest, at least at the beginning, to create a kind of a market, which also creates another form of accountability to the shareholder. And I think that the fact that we have a very small denominated market in Ukraine, that the various exchanges are, you're trading 2, 3, 4, 5% free float, is a big problem. And I think that this is one of the few countries where you have one person or two people owning these gigantic industrial enterprises. And one way, without punishing them, would be to create some kind of a mechanism for public participation in the equity markets.
I think that's an excellent idea, and you're right, it's not been discussed enough. Now I'd like to turn the subject ever so slightly. Reforms need to be implemented, but there is clearly an immediate task facing the new president, the East. So I'm going to throw this open with, again, a very sort of general question to get things rolling. Surely the president's first task has to be to calm the East. How is this best achieved?
You know, there is this expression that I like. You have to have the iron fist, but in velvet gloves. So we need to uphold and protect our interests, as the president did in his inauguration speech, very forcefully. At the same time, we need to open all kinds of possible dialogues that are possible there. But of course not with terrorists, but on the one hand with the people who are there and who have their doubts, about the future policies of government in Kyiv. That's why, for example, my first trip in my current position was to Donetsk. I spent the day there. I visited 2 companies. I spoke with representatives from different businesses. I had a talk with 450 students there, all done in Russian, just to demonstrate that that we are open for this kind of dialogue. And I know that the other ministers did the same thing. The prime minister was there as well. We know that the president plans his first trip to Donetsk as well. But it's also important to talk to Russia, and I think that the fact that we have this tri-party dialogue, or whatever that is, trialogue that we are having now in Kyiv with OSCE and Russia, I think it's quite important, because we need Russia, for example, to close the border on their side for the terrorists coming in. We need to close the border on our side, but those should be, the action should be on both sides.
Absolutely. So could I say, I agree. I think everybody agrees there has to be some kind of an outreach to the East. My question that I will tag on to the answer you're about to give is, who do you talk to?
Well, I would first like to say what has to accompany this outreach. Please. First of all, the dialogue is not with the East. This is a constructed, invasive conflict. It is empowered, financed, directed by Russian-inspired agents and Russian-inspired forces. There is absolutely no question this is not an authentic civil war. There was never a precursor to it in a civic movement of discontent. This was completely constructed. And I think that the answer is in negotiations with Moscow, and a firm Western policy of a third level of sanctions is an absolutely essential part of this. That said, we now have the crisis of what is the leadership. The Party of Regions has fallen apart. The people who were sort of left the Party of Regions and tried to play both sides, like Mr. Akhmetov, have lost their credibility in representing the East. And these Russian citizens who are pretending to be prime ministers and ministers of defense, and these traitors who are ministers of security from the Alpha brigades and so on, these are not interlocutors. They have to be jailed or they have to be defeated. The real question is for Ukraine to find interlocutors. And I think the president's suggestion of, after the regulation of the conflict, which means finding some kind of modus vivendi with Russia, aided by Western pressure, should follow very quickly with some kind of an election, local election process, under perhaps new laws that empower regions to elect their own leaders, which would allow a new leadership to emerge, which could be then the bargainer and the negotiator. So it seems to me that the president has already laid out the parameters of where compromises are possible. Yes, compromises on language, but no to a state language. Yes, decentralization, but no to federalism. So I think, President Poroshenko has it right, and it's very important for him to get out in front of this, not to let other people to hijack the priorities of the Ukrainian state. But I think there's no solution of negotiation with the Ponomaryovs, the Gubaryovs, and the Belzers Bestlers I wouldn't call them of Ukraine, of Russia. There is only driving them out or forcing the Kremlin to call them home.
But then, anyways, there is a situation we have there. There would be economic harm. It's already there for the companies, for the small business, medium business, like big business anyways. And so what is the economic plan for the East? And we know how you devolve the powers to a political class there that is corrupt and also clanned. Like when you have, like you can't devolve power to Mr. Akhmetov and how it would work.
I think the plan...
How you work with oligarchs there and how you work with the people for with the economy.
The plan is universal for the East and the West, North and South, and that is liberalization, deregulation, export promotion. I don't think that we need to differentiate the companies in the East or in the West. All of them should have the same opportunities, and all of them do have the same opportunities in terms of open European market. I think now the idea is to get our act together, de-escalate situation in the East, take these two regions under control as soon as possible. I think that people are probably sick and tired of what is happening there, and start producing goods and services that can be sold on the global markets.
But what would be the proposition from Kiev that people would understand, like how to communicate? I mean, there are cases in the world history when there is a region in a trouble, so there is some proposition, and everybody knows here that Donbass has economic troubles, and the people would really understand this language of the economy, of the language of the well-being. So when you would have a chance to talk to the people and they would ask, what Kiev gives to us, what would you tell?
Well, see, I have the problem of this logic. What Kiev gives to us and what Moscow gives to us. We are not in the marketplace here. We have to save the country. The united country, and for that we need to produce. We need to produce globally competitive goods and services, East or West. It relates to everybody, because see, otherwise we create a very, very harmful precedent that you start to riot against the national government, and then you try to negotiate some goodies from the capital. I don't think this is the right approach. I think we should make sure that all the companies, especially small and medium companies, have an equal access as the companies represented by oligarchs, East or West.
And Adrian, when there is also this idea that it can be some kind of a Marshall Plan for Donbass, because it's still cheaper than a war. It's cheaper than military expenses. What do you think on that? How reasonable is that?
Well, I think that if the Ukrainian authorities show the capacity to be able to restore order and credibility of their authority in the Donbass, that the Western community understands implicitly that Ukraine is now a central focal point of the stability of the international order, and that the amount of aid and assistance that has already been offered is a beginning of a longer-term relationship. More importantly, the stabilization of the East will allow investment to come in, because Ukraine does have certain competitive advantages in terms of the cost of its labor force, the relatively skilled labor force that it has to offer at a strong price point differential. So I think that these processes will work. But I think that what we've seen where Ukraine differs from not just on the levels of corruption and on the levels of concentration of wealth is the lack of development of small and medium enterprises. And here I refer to the minister to talk about how these structures are done. But it seems to me that the priority is to create an entrepreneurial society where small business, small service organizations become a very important engine. And of course, we have the IT sector. We have agriculture as important potential drivers for further expansion of the Ukrainian economy. But I do think that the question that you raised is what will Kiev do for the Donbass? The question is, why hasn't the Donbass been asking this for the last decade when their leaders have been in power for 7 of the last 10 years, because Mr. Yanukovych was also in power for years as prime minister under Mr. Kuchma or 8 of the last 12 years, whatever the number is. Donbass was represented at the highest levels of power, and yet there was a kind of a quiescence. In some sense, I think that's a good thing, but the problem is that the Donbass is now diverted from asking the right questions. The Donbass is mobilized, but it's mobilized and diverted into this false idea that a people's republic or some new solution, integration with Russia is the answer. The real answer is for the Donbass to have a more mobilized society, a society that holds its domestic local leaders to account, and to start asking questions about Mr. Akhmetov's holdings domestically. How do you acquire this wealth, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems to me that the discourse, we need to turn the discourse around and to use that discourse to, in a sense, clean up the structure of power and wealth and influence inside the Donbass once order is restored in the region. And I think that the fact that there are citizens who misguidedly took to violence, but some citizens, look, I think it was terrible that there was this manipulation of the vote for the Donetsk Republic, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, the referendum, and that clearly the majority of people didn't participate in that process. But the fact that people went out into the streets showed that they're looking for a peaceful way out, and it was like I would say a cri de coeur, a cry from the heart, that they want some solution to their problems. The problem is they don't understand that the real solution is an integration into the West. We've just came back from Wroclaw. My wife, who had never been to Poland before, and is an American and who travels widely in Russia and Ukraine, had tears in her eyes because she saw a Slavic society that works so successfully with a large middle class. And she thinks how much suffering there is in Russia, in Ukraine, and the like. And I think we need to convey that message that there is a better way, and the better way is middle class development, accountability, and also let the Donbass pressure its own oligarchs and try to put its own house in order, rather than to say that all the answers are in Kiev.
We have some questions from the audience. Like, we're happy to tell, there is a question, you can see it from John Hudson. He's a staff writer from the Foreign Policy. And it's probably to you, Mr. Sheremetyev. It's like, why should US government believe that the government in Kiev will ever be able to pay off its debt? That's what interested him.
Well, because we are paying off our debts. I don't think I can find a better answer, because there was a window of opportunity to default, by the way, in May or June, by the way, and we decided to pay off our debts. Well, for that, of course, we needed to bring some additional loans into Ukraine and to stabilize the macroeconomic situation by, for example, reducing the budget deficit in half. Very strong measures that are quite seriously unpopular, but we understand we need to cure this addiction that Ukraine has, the double deficit addiction. One is the fiscal deficit and one is the trade deficit, and we are dealing with those. We are trying to cure our diseases. That's why all the governments and people in Ukraine, that's the most important, should believe that the government will pay off their debts.
Well, I think that the other thing is that, the former regime went onto the Eurobond markets and paid fantastically high premiums and fantastically high percentages to be able to finance its debt, and the ability to use the IMF debt at substantially lower rates of interest. Absolutely. And even the minister was mentioning an incredibly, I would say, beneficial US line of credit where you're paying under 2% as opposed to 9–10% that the previous government was paying. The ability to refinance the debt is also a part of this. I think the overall debt financing burden in Ukraine is being reduced, and that, I think, points the way. And if macroeconomic changes are made, the war has to be stopped. And I think the question is being asked is, will the war be stopped? I think if the conflict in the East is not stopped, it puts into question the capacity of the state to pay off its debts, because nothing is being collected in the East. The size of the overall government intake is, the cost of war is an expensive burden on the government, all those kinds of things. But assuming that this can be regulated, controlled, and resolved in the next few months, I think the general feeling is, by all the people who are still buying Ukrainian bonds and still buying Ukrainian paper, that Ukraine will be able to follow through.
I'll remind we are here is a special edition of Hromadske TV, Ukrainian independent online television with the Atlantic Council. And I'm a Ukrainian journalist. David is a British journalist here working in Ukraine. And we have a guest, Minister of Economic and Development of Ukraine, Pavlo Sheremeta, and Adrian Karatnitsky, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. And I should also remind that you can watch, we'll be watching it in English, and you can watch it in Ukrainian at Hromadske. And also, if you want, you can follow our Twitter and Facebook, and there they find the link to the broadcast in English. So we ask the entire world to ask the questions. I would introduce, they would have two topics. Everybody is a bunch of questions, both about the West and about Russia. So I'll let you question on that.
Well, we've talked about sort of Western government, so I'd like to sort of bring in a question to you both, but formulate it slightly differently. So, Minister, what help would you like to see from the West, from the international community, from the EU, from the US? What help would you like to see from them at this moment in time? Would it be greater sanctions on Russia? Would it be aid? Would it be expertise? What would you like to see coming into Ukraine from the international community?
Well, as I mentioned, the help that is coming to Ukraine is quite overwhelming, and we appreciate it very much. I think that we also should ask, we're trying to answer that question, what Ukraine can give to the West and to the East as well, in return for that huge support that is coming to Ukraine. But a more direct answer to your question is that ideally we would like the West, the European Union, the North America, keep and protect the values and principles that these countries are based on and were based on, that European Union is based on, and by the way, that hundreds of Ukrainian people lost their lives for these values and principles. And that is the principles of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And I know that there are some competing offers on the table, and sometimes these offers look quite lucrative. But ideal support, and it's not only for Ukraine, it's for these societies as well, is to keep these values.
Okay, I would like to sort of formulate the same question to you, but in slightly different form. What help first? The same question. Also, do you think the EU, the US, are doing enough to help Ukraine? If not, what could be improved?
Well, I think the financial package that has been put together is an adequate and initial first step. And I have no quarrels with either the generosity or the focus of it or the efficacy of it. I think it is a good disciplining factor, and it is also enough float to allow Ukraine to cope with its short-term and even maybe mid-term problems. The issue that I have a greater quarrel with on is the pace at which pressure on Russia is ratcheted, because as you can tell from my earlier points, I don't feel there is a civil war going on. I don't think there are, it's sort of like, you remember under the Soviet period, we had dozens of Marxist-Leninist national liberation movements. Well, the Soviet Union disappeared. How many Marxist-Leninist movements are taking over countries today? Not a one. These were, yes, there was poverty, yes, there was discontent, but these were mobilized in very specific ways. It's the same thing. Yes, there is discontent, yes, there is poverty, yes, there is confusion and anomie on the part of people in the East from remoteness from the people who took power in Kiev. But that did not automatically mean an insurgency. This was constructed and driven. So I think we need to address this. We need to know what the real focus of evil is, to use an old Cold War phrase, and we need to kind of negotiate our way out of it. And there, it requires very tough sanctions. But the point that I always make is that the answer is not in our stars or in our IMF packages. The answer is in ourselves. I think Ukrainians have a lot of creativity in the civic sector. They have a lot of creativity now in the arts. There's a lot of energy. That energy has to find creative entrepreneurial solutions. If there's some stability, macroeconomic and in terms of security, I think capital will come to Ukraine. I think Ukraine is on everyone's radar screen, and I think that the starting point from Ukraine in terms of wages and so on is an interesting entry point for the level of skills and the level of dynamism that the society seems to be generating. So I think that the issue is not so much if you solve those problems, and I think they're on the pathway to solution. The real solution lies in the capacity of Ukrainians to think through the processes. And I think there's been so much creativity shown that I don't believe that it is just confined to the civic sector, the political sector, or to the cultural sector. It also resides in the business sector.
I just want to take you up on that point, because one thing that has struck me over the several months that I've been here is the empowerment of civil society. I've called it in various articles, the rise of the virtual state. I mean, we've got people going on Facebook and crowdfunding the army. All these sorts of things I've found extremely striking and actually fairly unique. I've been around the world and I haven't seen it to this degree. Now, when it comes to, let's say, help, aid, whatever you want to call it, do you think actually people should be looking at, as well as dealing with the government, actually dealing directly with activists, sort of funneling aid directly to these sorts of people who are actually filling very much the role of the state in certain areas?
Well, I think that is one approach, and certainly private sector delivery of services, and I think that the state should be open to the idea of their effective social agencies and so on, to privatizing some of the functions of social services. So I think that's a reasonable approach. But I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about the fact that I do believe that there is, once some of these problems that civil society has to address, certainly once the problems of corruption are dealt with in a significant way, I think people will be, entrepreneurs will crawl out of the woodworks and start working. And I think what we need is small business development, small, creative kind of cottage industries, artisanal kinds of things, really creative solutions. And I think Ukrainians are more than capable of doing that. I think, so I think we need that next entrepreneurial revolution. If the minister could probably tell us the statistics of how many small businesses there are in Poland versus the United States. And it's just a completely different order of magnitude. And I think that is the next revolution that has to happen.
We have a question from the audience. So it is, what will the current government do to secure foreign investment in real estate in Ukraine?
Well, thank you for that question. It's not just real estate. It's basically whatever foreign investment. Three things. Number one, we are now adopting this set of measures to simplify business in Ukraine. Taking the ranking of ease of doing business, Ukraine at the moment is number 112. We are benchmarking with the countries which are in the top 10. We have Georgian advisors. I lived and worked for some time in Malaysia, advising the government of Malaysia. Malaysia is number 6 in that ranking. So we do have an experience of the countries in the top 10. We need to simplify business, and that would, of course, spur investment. Number 2 is usually laws is not enough. It's implementing the laws. And I have to say that, unfortunately, in many places, the government bodies, agencies still have a pretty hostile attitude to business. I mean, that's the reality, and we have to fight with that reality. Well, first, at the moment, we're explaining to those agencies what the reality is in the world, and if they don't accept it soon enough, I think that these people should be replaced with the people who understand that their mission is to help Ukrainian businesses to compete internationally. That's number 2. Number 3, of course, is judicial system to protect investment, and especially actually whatever, including the real estate, because as we know, in the past, the system was corrupt, did not work well enough, and that's also the judicial reform and maybe some of the vetting procedures that we need to do with the judges so that we ensure the just decisions by the courts.
And still, it would be for you, Pavlo, like, about a lot of people here talk to this about the sanctions. So, do you think sanctions towards Russia? So, do you think they could be more robust? And how you deal with Russia economically? How Ukraine should deal at this stage?
The issue of sanctions is the issue between the countries who adopt the sanctions and Russia. What I can say as a Ukrainian government official is the following. We trusted the superpowers who signed the Budapest Protocol, for example, right? Well, now we realize that we trusted too much. And so now, I would say whatever means can be used, carrots and sticks, in order to protect the Ukrainian territorial integrity, which was guaranteed by these parties, would be good to use.
We would have a lot of questions about Russia, you know, about Crimea, and there would be like some of them are similar. But what would be this Ukrainian policy towards Crimea at this moment?
I mean, this policy is very clear. We believe that Crimea is an integral part of Ukraine.
But how to make business, how to deal, and what to do with the people, what would be the economical policy?
Well, we have the law on temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine that specifies specifically the attitude of Ukraine towards businesses and its citizens.
Any like special policy? Any?
There
are a lot of things discussed here.
We are creating the agency, special agency on Ukraine, on Crimea, excuse me, in the Ukrainian government. So of course, Crimea will continue to be under our radar screen for sure.
So, and what should Ukraine's future relations be with Russia and Ukrainian policy, also in economy?
Well, it's easier to answer in the economy, because in the economy, any economist would understand, and by the way, Russian economists do understand, that trade is beneficial. Shooting is mutually destructive. So we should move as soon as possible from shooting to trading. But I have to mention very specifically that our first paragraph and our first sentence in all of our discussions with our Russian counterparts is that annexation of Crimea was internationally illegal.
That is important. And I do have the question, which was like really followed by people before the show. What would be that was from Euromaidan France. People, it's not this one, but they asked what would be the policy of Ukrainians toward the Ukrainians living abroad. A lot of people really asked that before we were preparing for the show.
Look, it should be the most welcoming. Ukrainians living abroad are Ukrainians, and the more Ukrainian investment we bring into Ukraine, the more Ukrainian ideas from all around the world we bring into Ukraine, the richer we all are.
Can I say something as
an
American of Ukrainian ancestry? The first thing I think Ukraine should do is to take full advantage of the Ukrainians who are not from the diaspora but who are educated in Western institutions. And I think that the minister is very eager to integrate people who have had educations at the elite universities. And now there's a big cohort of people in the West who are now either part of the recent diaspora who want to come and to serve for a couple years, or maybe even to make even a stronger long-term commitment. And I think that that's a vast power. We were just in Wroclaw together, and the president of Estonia used to be an American. I'm not saying that the Ukrainians in the diaspora are aspiring to be presidents, but there may be something in between being president of the country and doing something constructive to help business, to help the government, and so on. But the first line, I think, of where you ought to be looking is not just the diaspora, but this very large pool of people who are now, I think, highly motivated, if the government is pursuing, transparent policies, to give up some of their time and knowledge and to work within government structures. So I know a lot of people have been dismissed, there's a lot of corruption, so I'm hoping that there will be this very systematic process of integrating such talent into the talent pool of the government and government institutions.
Okay, I'll just jump in here. Minister, I know you're very busy and that you're going to have to leave us. We're very grateful again for your time. So I'd like to ask a final question to you. You are very much at the forefront of the new Ukraine. You're right in the middle of it, as we say in Britain. So I would like to say, 6 months from now, where would you like to see Ukraine tangibly?
6 months from now, I would like to see peace all around Ukraine. I want to see the beginnings of economic growth. I want to see the companies, small, medium, big, excited about the opportunities that they have all around the world, thinking, developing, innovating, world-class, innovative products that can be sold internationally. I would like to see the Ukrainian consumers, going back to stores and restaurants and spending money, because what we have at the moment is a little bit of withdrawal, which is absolutely understandable. So in summary, we would like to see the foundations, the sound foundations of the future economic growth.
Let's hope that that happens. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we would, thanks a lot. We would waiting for Anna to come. So it's very simple it's hromadske, and though it's with the Atlantic Council, we are very informal. Anna would join us and we would introduce her. So we would ask Adrian, there would be the question to you as well regarding the Crimea. That would be, like that here is. Why isn't it that EU and OSCE do not demand that Russia returns Crimea as a first step of de-escalation of conflict?
Because I think there's another even more urgent and deadly escalation of conflict that has to be tackled first. I mean, I think it's very clear that it will be very hard unless there is a change of regime in Russia, to see Russia returning the Crimea back to Ukraine in the short term. And I think that therefore Ukraine has an amazing advantage to help to create a Russia that could return Crimea back to Ukraine. That is to say that in the last few months we've seen an upsurge of liberal, democratic Russian language discourse among Ukrainian Russian speakers, among ethnic Russians who are active in Ukraine, who are integrally related to the Maidan phenomenon. And I think this is an extremely dangerous phenomenon for Mr. Putin. And I think that the fact that in Russia, while civic liberal discourse is being shut down, that a very broad-based Russian language discourse on democracy and freedom exists in Ukraine, suggests that Ukraine will be a haven for Russian speakers of all nationalities and of all states to engage in the maintaining of the flame of liberal democratic values. And I think that is the answer. A Russia that is liberal and democratic would be the Russia that is the most likely to return Crimea to Ukraine.
I'm happy to introduce Anna, who is a civil society leader. She was the part of the Maidan movement, a civil sector of Maidan at its inception, and has been an active recently coordinating the group of the Ukrainian civil society activists who introduced the emergency reform package. We also can see, I found this photo of Anna. She was corresponding Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, during his first visit to Ukraine. We see you would be chosen. I know Hannah is a bit of darling of everybody these days, becoming very popular.
He looks thrilled to be meeting you, Hannah. I have never seen him that happy, Joe Biden.
I mean, she knew what to tell.
He doesn't smile that broadly when he's with Hillary Clinton for some reason we don't know why.
But I know Anna is a person who keeps her politician accountable. And David, you would have a question.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard from the minister, which was extremely interesting, but as I've said, I've been here several months now. We met very early on, actually, when I just arrived in Ukraine, and what you said was fascinating. But I keep coming back to this again and again, which is the empowerment of civil society in Ukraine. I've found it, quite frankly, incredible and unique, and I've traveled to many places around the world. So I would like to ask you just to start off by saying, do you believe since Maidan, which was perhaps the apex of civil society, you removed a president you didn't like, do you believe civil society is still going strong? Do you believe the energy of Maidan, which is what we're talking about after all, is still going strong?
Actually, I would like to say that Maidan is continuing, but not Maidan as a physical place in the downtown of the capital of Ukraine. Now we have to reorient the energy from Maidan into the energy into the reforms. And actually, this is the revolution of dignity and how we transform this revolution into the revolution of effectiveness. And this is very important now for civil society leaders and also for the whole society to choose this way of reforms. Why it's really important? Because after the Orange Revolution in 2004, we didn't learn our lessons. And now this is a higher time not to miss our opportunity to change the system. And actually reforms is the only way how we can change the system. And we launched our emergency package of reforms at the beginning of March, and March 7th. And for 3 months of our active advocacy campaign, we managed to pass only 7 laws. We adopt the 7 laws. This is very important laws, of course, but it's still just a very small number of laws.
So what do you find the problems that you've been facing? You said you could only pass 7 laws. What problems did you face?
The biggest problem is that the system is resisting. And we see that there are lots of old bureaucrats that got the chance to return to the power after the Maidan victory, when more than 100 people were died for Ukraine and for democracy in this country. And actually, all these guys, they are the children of the system. And of course, they know all schemes, how to steal money, how to work together with Party of Regions and other guys. So actually, they are not interested in real reforms. For example, the reform of police or prosecutor office reforms that Venice Commission and Council of Europe and other international institutions expecting from Ukraine to be passed like 2 years ago. But even now, after 3 months and a half after Maidan, actually no real results. And we are pushing Ukrainian parliament, we're pushing Ukrainian government to make steps towards reforming the police, reforming the prosecutor office, and no results.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
From your experience, you work a lot with the parliament, and we know that the parliament now is a little more open and malleable because it is under still the shock of the Maidan phenomenon and the sort of the sensitivity to the mood of the public. But do you think that this parliament can be trusted to implement the package of reforms that you want, or do you think that that will require the election, a new wave of parliamentary elections? Do you think this configuration of a parliament is capable, under civic pressure, to implement a broad range of reforms, or do you think you will meet resistance, and that the longer this goes on, that there will be a sort of a decline in your capacity to move things forward?
Now our initiative is facing the resistance, and actually this parliament is running out of the trust from the civil society and from the Ukrainian voters. And actually, as I mentioned before, only 7 laws, very important laws to reanimate the country. This is a very small amount. And it's a sign for us and for the international community that this parliament is not interested in changing the system.
Let me ask you a follow-on question, and that is, do you have an ongoing discussion with the donors, with the tranches of aid that are coming from the IMF and from the European Union, and are they sensitive to the idea that they can link the movement of tranches to success in meeting the agendas that civil society is having for?
Our experts, especially from anti-corruption sector, were a part of a working group that were working on a EU state building grant. It's 350 millions of euros that will be given to Ukraine, and actually we were working on conditionalities. And as Jan Tombinsky and other experts saying that actually we will consult with civil society to give another tranches or not to give. And all our requirements to international community is first reforms, then money. And it's really very important that international communities heard our demands, because before we have a lot of examples when international community just support the corruption in Ukraine by giving money and not requiring the reports and real reforms. This is why for 23 years of our independence, we have this default situation. Even this first tranche from IMF, this is just to help Ukraine to postpone the default, but not to avoid, and till autumn, without real anti-corruption reform, real internal reforms, especially focusing on support of medium-sized business, it would be hard to avoid default situation.
I would just tell that this program is for the audience to ask the question to both of you. And actually you were starting that using the hashtag Maidan Lives On. Hanna, what will be your next steps after emergency package? You started about that already.
Actually, reanimation package of reforms as an idea, and as an idea of reforms, this is a long-term way. So actually we understand that we just started this, and after emergency package of reforms there will be stabilization package of reforms and then development. Because even now it's hard, and we understand that we are focusing on priorities areas like anti-corruption, decentralization and regional development, administrative reform, judiciary system reform, law enforcement reforms, prosecutor office reforms, tax reform, media reform and election system reform. This is a key priority that in complex could reanimate the country. And besides, our experts, we have more than 150 experts, independent experts from different analytical centers, think tank groups that are working on developing the bills on healthcare reform, education reform, agrarian reform, public finance reforms, and others. We have more than 16 groups working on reforming, developing the drafts, advocating in the parliament and cabinet of ministers, and then working on implementation, because it's very important to combine adoption and implementation and public awareness campaign.
I think this is very important. This is a question I'd like to put to you, Adrian. Now, what strikes me is when Hannah was talking about the resistance to reforms, there is a whole class, a swathe of people who have a vested interest in corruption. And I've seen this all over the country. Now, you take, for example, the Burqa, the riot police. Obviously, what they did in Maidan was unforgivable. They were disbanded. But what you saw with these people is that many of them ended up inside the occupied buildings that I was in East Ukraine. Now, it seems to me, speaking to people, many people over the course of months, to root out corruption, you've got to make huge numbers of people. You've got to fire huge numbers of people. You've got to reform the police force. What do you do when you have a class of people vested in corruption that have existed for 2 decades? What do you do with these people? Because you have to get rid of them. But as you said, they end up, in East Ukraine. What do you do with these people? This seems to me a central problem here.
Well, I don't think there's an easy solution to this. I mean, I think that, at root, I think that the biggest problem was that there was, at the apex of power, this corrupt system. And as we understand the way that it worked in the last 3 or 4 years, it was extremely well and systematically organized. At some level, that's an important ally of rooting out corruption. The better systemic and systematically organized is the corruption, the more easy it is to uproot it. We sort of have a narrative of Mr. Alexander Yanukovych's in interventions in the personnel of the police and the security structures and so on. And these have shown, in terms of even personal security and the security of the state on the territories, how corruption can lead to a complete collapse of policing functions and defense functions. So I think that that is another stimulant, stimulus for a thoroughgoing reform. The question is how deep do you go? I think it will be incredibly burdensome if you have the prisons cluttered with tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. So I'm not sure how I have an answer to that, but I think there's got to be some kind of a middle ground with some demonstrative acts of punishment for corruption, especially for grand corruption, and then more airtight systems that punish ongoing schemes of corruption. The idea is not necessarily to punish everything that existed in the past, but to punish ongoing corruption under the new government. That said, people who were engaged in grand corruption in a systematic way at the higher levels and the middle levels should, I think, be subject to criminal prosecution.
Natalia, you have some more questions?
To combine, we have got some questions also from the Ukrainian audience, but to combine, so many people asking when they meet the civil society leaders, telling like how bright they are, by asking like, but can you really influence? You know, like there are still the other people with money, with power who can take decision. Like, do you really have an impact? What can be done? And it also like following, maybe you can edit the question in the Ukrainian. It would be good if Mr. Sheremeta was answering, but it's also up to you because you are the ones who change in government. How it's possible in Ukraine to introduce the e-governance and actually have the more impact of the, like to have more direct democracy, like on your practice?
Actually, within the reanimation package of reforms, there is a special group working on e-governance. And last week they had a meeting with Mr. Groisman, our minister, and actually they were discussing the steps how to implement e-governance in Ukraine. It's very important for civil society to introduce new ideas and actually to provide a plan how to push government to pass it. And now we can say that we started our communications with responsible ministry with e-governments. Of course, there will be some barriers, but I think we could overcome it.
And about the way, how do they listen to you? And they can listen, but do they follow what you are trying to push?
Every week we are preparing our public agenda for parliamentaries. We visit the Agreement Council every Monday, and we prepare our agenda, which consists of several drafts laws that are sitting in the parliament, and we would like to be passed during the week. And also for the Cabinet of Ministers, Ukrainian government, we also prepare this agenda. And of course, without public pressure, without involving self-defense after Maidan, it's hard to pass very important legislation as to the judiciary reforms on public procurement. And I do remember when in April, when we were lobbying or advocating for law on judiciary system, we were standing from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. Near the parliament, actually urging the MPs to pass. And without 500 or even more activists involving after Maidan and shins, I don't know how to say it in English, shiny.
Oh, the tires, firing the tires, the usual practice here in Ukraine.
As a science that we used in our information materials. Yep. Actually, this was also an argument in April, the beginning of April, for MPs, and another instrument to push them to vote for this important legislation.
Can I say something about, not your answer, but the question about direct democracy? I do think that it is important to have a firm belief in what I would call Republican government, which is representative government, where legislators are under pressure, but they're under pressure from a variety of groups, and when they vote, they take into account a set of different factors. And if you have, there is such a thing as too much democratic participation. We see that when you have EU elections and only 20% of people are motivated to vote, that you have very unrepresentative developments which don't really reflect what the national elections when there is a much higher level of participation. And the danger of having, say, plebiscitary democracy where there are too many questions asked is that people turn off and don't pay attention to the issues. And I think that there should be a strong faith in representative government, provided that it is elected and provided that it is subject to media scrutiny, criminal prosecution for legal violations, and civic mobilization. And you may be fighting for one issue, there may be another lobby that's fighting for another issue. Let them fight it out and let the elected representatives find the vector of the best interest. It may not always be the best policy, but I think it is the best process for retaining a representative form of government.
Still, Adrian, like lots of people still asking, so really, can the civil society run the country? Somehow you were catching on that, but that's what a lot of people want. Like, you would have the other question to Anna, like, oh no, the different question would be to Anna here, like, is Anna, are you gonna to join the government at any stage? I'll have this tweet, I mean, like, or like, can it be that you stay in the civil society and run the country?
Civil society won't run the country, but it can keep other people from running away with the country. That's how I would answer it.
Very pithy.
Here it is. But
sorry, no, please.
Actually, it's very important to have the strong civil society and to strong watchdog organization that will be controlling and making the government, the president, and the parliament responsible, accountable, and this is really very important. If we look at the Georgian example, for when Saakashvili became a president, a lot of people from think tanks group, civil society moved to the government, moved to the presidential administration, and it weakened the position of civil society. And in 3-4 years period, we saw the results. So actually, I support the idea that for Ukraine's future, it's better to have strong civil society that produce the agenda, that increase the level of professionalism of the parliamentaries, of the cabinet of ministers, and actually control. This is really very important. And also, because this civil society has have to control even new political forces that will have the opportunity to become a member of the parliaments if they are pre-election or early election in this autumn. So we need strong civil society, and also we need a new political elite, new political parties in the parliament to change all these people that were voted for the dictatorship law in January 16, and also that now are not interested in passing very important legislation that we promoting. Natalia just saw our agenda that we prepared for every week, and actually now civil society and our experts is replacing the government and replacing the parliament by producing legislation. Absolutely. And with their support, of course, helping to introduce this law, submit in the parliament, and then advocate from the first reading to second, then working on the implementation. We are traveling also in regions, and we see the big demand from civil society leaders in regions, from local elite, local journalists, to be a part of reforming process of the country. They want their voices to be heard, and actually they want to be involved in this process of the system change in Ukraine.
I'll just let you that the people would see how it looks. It's like very clear, like there is the IT corruption reform, administrative reform, human rights, what they would need. What these figures mean?
These figures is in the number of drafts law sitting in the parliament. And for example, this law, the number is very important for Ukraine and to change the rules and to help Ukrainian politicians to change their attitudes to the politics. Why? Because this law, this is the law on public access to the registry of real estate. This law was failed at the end of March in the parliament, and we submitted in the middle of April as a second attempt this law, because this is really important. This law will open the information about small Mezhigirya, Yanukovych residency, in all small town, small oblast that belongs to local prosecutor office, local judges, local bureaucrats, and we saw how Parliament failed with this law, and now it's not considered in the committees.
And I remember that Hanna was questioning Yulia Tymoshenko very hard. It got very viral in Ukraine. Like, if you your political force won't implement that, we don't see that you really change.
Well, good for you,
like
Hannah.
everybody was asking. So that's how it looks.
I'd like to...
And actually, I would like to, for instance, this human rights, our initiative, together with some MP, because we also established the Interfaction Parliamentary Groups, the platform of reforms that consists of 28 MPs in the parliament, the draft law on ratification of Rome Statute that will provide access to the International Criminal Court to Ukraine. And it's also a very important step to realize Maidan demands and all higher politicians that were human rights violated has to be seated in the prison.
By the way, it's not just important for the losses of lives in the Maidan. War crimes are being committed now in the Russian incursion in eastern Ukraine, and that also is something with executions and so on. These are actually crimes of war.
And actually, the reforms agenda, this is really very important to unite the country, because there are similar problems like corruption in hospitals, in education, everywhere in in the western part of Ukraine. So actually, through reforming the country, we could send the real message to the whole Ukrainians and unite the country.
What I'd like to actually jump in here at some point, because there's something we haven't discussed really yet, and Adrian bringing the discussion back to Russia was very good. In terms of threats to civil society, you know, across my time here, what has really struck me is perhaps one of the greatest threats is not even Russian military aggression, but is Russian propaganda. The media war that Ukraine is under, that is facing from Moscow, is intense, and it is having real effect on the ground. I mean, I was in amongst, you know, the occupied buildings, and you had your soldiers and everything, but you had a lot of people genuinely convinced that Kiev was run by a fascist junta, and that Pravi sector was surrounding the buildings they were in with snipers ready to kill them. You know, it seems to me that a section of this country has been under the sway not of Ukrainian media or Ukrainian information, but Russian information. And what do we do about this, Adrian? Because this to me seems critical.
Well, you know,
and this is, I pop up, that is also a question from our audience, so you can join by using Maidan Lives on hashtag. So how can Ukraine...
Let's divide things. Let's first send a clear message to Ukrainian viewers that Russian propaganda is not working in the democratic world.
Absolutely.
The role of independent journalists who go out and who deeply examine the processes leads to truth-telling, and that destroys the Russian propaganda networks. Russian TV, Russia Today, which is perceived as a joke, and fewer serious people are now appearing on it as a result. So I don't think Ukraine is losing the propaganda war there. I am staying in a Ukrainian hotel, and every day I can see I can see Russian propaganda on a daily basis through R24, Dmitry Kiselyov, people talking about the new fascist president, 3 talking heads in a similar setting as this, broadcast on Ukrainian television at a time when there is a war. I think it is time, with all due respect to civil liberties, that war propaganda and hate propaganda has to be in a state of emergency, in a state when there is violence and death, has to be curtailed, and all these stations should be cut off immediately now. And I don't have no understanding why no one in authority has taken that measure to make sure that there is no satellite broadcasting, no capacity to broadcast on cable of any Russian news and propaganda.
I would agree.
Just to add, because this is really very important, we managed to pass the law on public broadcasting, and during the Maidan we realized the importance of free media, because in Ukraine, unfortunately, the all media belongs to oligarchs, and we had a sad story when even Polish TV channels were streaming from Maidan when people were killed by snipers, and Ukrainian TV channels that belongs to very famous pro-democratic oligarchs entertainment during this very sad period of Ukrainian history. And now we also working on the legislation about the media ownership, beneficiary of TV channels. And it's also responsibility of Ukrainian oligarchs about the future of Ukrainians, because they proved their real patriotism to money, and they were like a dog standing near the Putin, not showing the truth during the Maidan. And now it's time that Ukraine really need the independent and public broadcasting that will provide the objective information inside the country. And also, we realize that during the Maidan, Moscow and Russia use massive propaganda all over the world. But it also helped us to unite all diaspora people and also all Ukrainians that are living abroad, that were providing alternative information to the world using different channels, especially social networks. And in this situation, we also mobilize a lot of resources, and also now for us it's very clear who are real friends of Ukraine and who are just paid by Russia, Russia experts, different promoters of Russia, lobbyists, especially in media. And it also was a big test for Western media, because we saw even very influential media, they disseminated and published a lot of articles, not checked information. And it's a question if they did it just because they were paid, or...
But I would say, I don't want to dispute anything that you have said. Most of it is, I would 100% agree with. But the one point I would say is that there is a corrective process in the Western media, so that when there is some disinformation that is sent through, there is a mechanism of civil society, of other journalists checking facts, of counter-reporting, and that often leads to either retractions or corrections and so on. So I do think that, again, I would still think that despite the Russian, battery of resources, several $100 million that they throw into external propaganda, that it does not stand up to the truth, and it does not stand up to the truth that independent journalists are reporting Ukrainian media, independent Ukrainian journalists.
I agree with you, but one second, I just want to just come in on this point. You said that Russia is losing the media war. Internationally, you're right, but I'm talking about parts of Ukraine in the east where they're losing.
So just take out the transmitting
But wouldn't that make it worse? I mean, when you ban something, conspiracy theory flourishes, and people watch it covertly.
But conspiracy theory is coming from Moscow right now, so how much worse is it? I mean, I do think you can still have radio. I think radio is harder to jam, therefore people can look on different wavelengths. So if people are looking, I mean, I do think that in a state of war, without access to mass media, the local population can be terrorized, will not know what to do. But it just seems to me that it is possible to continue radio broadcasting, although I'm not so sure about how signals work, but my understanding is that radio signals can have a wider, don't have to be dispersed as narrowly as UHF or VHF signals. But I think the television broadcasting from Russia has to be taken out. If there is no access to normal Ukrainian state broadcasting, these terminals have to be taken down.
But I should add to the foreign audience that there is a huge discussion in Ukraine about that, and there are people who really understand the role of the freedom of speech. People here don't like to forbid the thing. They think if something is shut, if the Russian media are shut down, there should be some legal-based explanation. That's what we were fighting for here. And like I've also just remind, there are a lot of initiatives like we do have here. I'm very happy to welcome you at Hromadske, like done by the journalists, owned and run by the journalists.
But actually, Sviatoslav Vakurchuk Ukrainian famous singer, he told, if the freedom of speech of media threats the liberty of your country, we don't need such freedom of speech. And actually, I would like to use this chance and say big thanks to the big amount of international journalists who really, it's a big present for us that there are a lot of journalists who really investigate and actually support Ukrainian revolution of dignity.
And also who check their facts more than, say, some ministers who tweet regularly.
Yes.
But, Hanna, there is a question, but I would also add to it that what measures can you think to reach out to Donetsk? We talked a bit about with information to counter the propaganda. For me, it's rather, we see the Ukrainian government acting. There would be, for instance, like anti-terrorist operation in the east. And I would also tell in Ukraine, there is a discussion. A lot of people try to keep it accountable. That's what the reason. But what do you think the civil society can do what is your, like, you're an influential opinion leader here. Maybe a lot of civil activists are more trusted than the politician.
Absolutely.
I mean, among the active part of the society. So what are your answers?
My answer that there are lots of activists in Donetsk. There are lots of friends of mine that actually they don't have money even to publish some newsletter to be disseminated in Donetsk region. So the first, this support, financial support for local initiatives to disseminate the truth about the situation and some recommendations. Another, this is that Ukrainian governments and Ukrainian president should visit more often Donetsk and Lugansk and talk to people, especially with local businessmen, because they have a lot of requests to be heard and to be visited by our governments there and to discuss the solution with local people there.
Excellent. Well, I think that's exactly what's needed. I mean, the time I spent in Donetsk, as I keep coming back to, you know, amongst many other places in the East, the amount of disinformation was unbelievable, and they seem to have actually pretty good ways of disseminating. I would see thousands and thousands of flyers with Timoshenko described as a fascist, as a Nazi, everything. It was the one thing these people could organize properly, really. It was propaganda. Natalia, do we have any more questions from the audience?
Actually, we think we are perfectly well on time.
Wow.
And,
for TV, wow.
Thanks
a first for her, but
thanks so much for your contribution. I guess we are happy to make more joint project. This time was Hromadske TV, Ukrainian independent online television with the Atlantic Council, and we're happy here to see the senior fellow from the Atlantic Council.
We're coming back.
Yeah, sure. Anna Hubko, who is Ukrainian civil society leader, and thanks a lot for David being here.
I just keep coming back. I don't go anywhere.
Please come again and bring your friends.
You can see, so thanks to everybody, thanks for watching, and also thanks a lot for the audience for contributing their comments and the question. And we hope to see you again and with the different circumstances, but we are ready to answer the questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Не все показывают по телевизору. Вот вы, в частности, больше показываете.
Дозвольте, тут не що співати, так?
Що ти співаєш?
Это же, кстати, тоже некая поза. Вы же отлично понимаете русский язык.
Да.
Вам не соромно за цей закон? Ваш?
Ні.
Как вам страна, в которой теперь мы будем жить?
Страна мне нравится все больше и больше.
Уважайте мою маму и уважайте меня.
В уставе написано, что криминальные приказы можно не выполнять. Приказ обсуждается после его выполнения.
Да Януковича тут и все, а ты пришел! А я ни за кого, я журналист, я показываю вас такими, как вы есть.
Громадяни, ваші дії носять антигромадський характер.
Ви питання почули?
Стояв за зміну системи.
Кто эти люди?
Это говорит о том, что Виктор Федорович создал гражданское общество в Украине.
Сьогодні Україна повстала. Сьогодні Україна самоорганізувалася.
Это уже не митинг, это уже революция.
ніякий Янукович, ніякий цілий рік не буде президентом. Завтра до 10-ї години він має піти геть.
Сами разберемся!
Не надо нам никто! Все!
І буде сила, він мені в ногу стріляє, прямо.
Когда началась Вторая мировая война?
Что?
Когда началась Вторая мировая война?
41-м.
Да вы что? Вы готовы сидеть за гратами?
Я еще раз говорю, готов отвечать по закону, как все граждане. Закон один для всех. Мы показываем все как есть.
Побил фотоаппарат. Ты покажи нам документ, да?
Лучше мнение.
Покажи документ. За Россию.
Конечно же, это грандиозная ошибка считать, что украинцы и россияне – это, как искренне полагают некоторые люди в Москве, это разделенный народ. Нет.
Ви були переговорником під час російсько-грузинської війни в південній